Well, welcome to everyone to this webinar on the next generation of economic inclusion, building climate resilience for the poorest. My name is Benjamin Davis. I'm the director of the Inclusive Rural Transformation and Gender Equality Division at FAO in Rome. Before we begin, just some housekeeping. We're really looking forward to an interactive, engaging session. So please introduce yourselves in the chat box and start asking questions whenever they occur to you. There's simultaneous translation in French, Spanish, and English. And so please click on the globe icon in the Zoom platform, which is at the bottom of the screen, and to change the language to your preferred channel, including if your preferred language is English. So just some background on the session. The session marks the launch of the PEI's new publication entitled Climate Resilient Economic Inclusion, a framework for integrating climate action in economic inclusion programs. And really this represents the culmination of 2 years of research and consultations and analyzes the intersection of poverty and climate, and introduces a conceptual framework and assesses the emerging cross-sector operational approaches. This work will serve as a foundational reference for the next phase of the work plan of PEI, and which will seek to operationalize climate resilience within economic inclusion programs at the World Bank and work closely with other partners in doing so. So first, I would like to introduce Iffath Sharif, who's the Global Director for Social Protection and Jobs at the World Bank, and she'll be setting the stage and presenting the relevance of economic inclusion in building climate resilience as part of a broader adaptive social protection agenda and the bank's evolution. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ben. I hope you can hear me. Really, I'm delighted today to join you at this very timely Partnerships for Economic Inclusion Open House webinar, where we are coming together to address a very pressing issue, the climate and poverty nexus. As you all know, the scientific consensus on climate change is clear, and the impact on the poorest and the most vulnerable, particularly women, is stark, undeniable. We now have recent estimates telling us that climate change could push an additional 132 million people into extreme poverty in the next 5 years by 2030. That's fairly close, and this is in addition to some 700 million who still live in extreme poverty today. What we also know that climate change often exacerbates existing gender inequalities. Women often bear the disproportionate burden of climate change impacts. And so that's, again, a very important consideration for us. But we also know that policies and programs that are needed to accelerate the transition to a carbon neutral economy can also have adverse impacts on people by disrupting labor markets, increasing the prices of basic goods. So the challenges we face are great. And as a result, a profound shift needs to be underway towards more climate resilient development. And for international development organizations such as the World Bank, this requires pivoting decisively towards a climate-centric development approach. Many of you may have heard that during our annual meetings recently concluded in Marrakesh, our board and other stakeholders endorsed our new vision to create a world free of poverty on a livable planet, was declared. And then to achieve this vision, what we will need is of course, strong ambition, high ambition. And here, as Global Director of the Social Protection and Jobs Global Practice at the World Bank, we are ready to roll up our sleeves and really double down on our achievements so far. We are able to cover over 260 million people in poverty and facing multiple vulnerabilities. And we would like to really double that coverage by expanding and scaling up adaptive social protection systems by 2030. And this for us will need, making sure that these programs are targeted to the right people, to the poor and vulnerable, that they are tailored to meet the needs of the people, including the needs as we face climate change, but also timed so that people are able to cope with shocks. And in this space, we feel that the role of economic inclusion programs are critical, because not only do they help support the poor to cope with shocks, they also help to build long-term resilience, and this, we've seen from multiple evidence that have come, that have been shown in this space. As many of you know, and we will learn and we'll hear today about the nature of these programs. They're often very comprehensive in terms of combining various strategies to alleviate poverty. This includes a combination of cash transfers, training, coaching, access to markets, and other services. And in many ways, the flexibility of these programs with which they are designed allow them to be multi-purpose investments, and hence have a lot of promise. And again, many of you know, and I don't have to remind you, but of the great work that people like Abhijit Banerjee has done, that have shown how these programs have not only increased savings, but they also help to promote financial literacy, can reduce climate vulnerability, help poor people prepare to cope with shocks. And now we have, in fact, encouraging evidence for our own programs from the World Bank, where we're seeing, in the case of Nigeria, for example, a recent impact evaluation, Niger, revealed that, there has been a remarkable increase in households' ability to earn revenue. The scale of 100% or so. Similar evidence recently learned is coming from our Senegal program, where we are actually showing quite significant reduction in poverty, including the ability for households to not only meet climate shocks, but actually help them build assets. So these are very encouraging evidence that help us, that make us think that these economic inclusion programs could be a very sound instrument to help with dealing with climate shocks. But that said, as I mentioned, these are early evidence, early work, and more needs to be done to make these programs more intentional to face and help households deal with climate change and have these climate change considerations in program design. And this is where I'm excited that we are meeting today, and we'll be discussing some of those elements and how we can take these design elements to scale so that we can actually increase our coverage of people, and because the need is so great. And so we hope that more evidence can be built, more testing and piloting and experimentation with these programs that help to tailor to the needs of the context and people, that help to target the right groups of people, and that we're able to time these interventions well to meet with the immediate needs, will be part of this discussion today. So again, this kind of scale of ambition requires all of you to be equal partners in our journey, and we hope that will be also part of the discussion today. And I'm really excited and encouraged to see the kind of interest that we are seeing in these programs, and today's event is a testament to that. And so let me conclude by saying that you have with us in the World Bank a partner with all of you to help us get to scale and move, as Ben was saying, the next generation of economic inclusion programs that can actually be fit for purpose. At the same time, help us achieve scale and cover larger numbers of people, and help us with our ambition to actually double coverage in the next 5 years together. And again, I'm thrilled to to know that we will have this fantastic set of panelists to help us think about some of the solutions. And we will hear from Bolivia, Malawi, and other colleagues from the FAO and other institutions. And we hope that at the end of the day, we are able to not only learn about some of these exciting cases and results, but also build stronger partnerships to help us move on this journey. And this is a partnerships platform, and we really look forward to all of your support to strengthen this partnership we have with all of you. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to start off this discussion. Back to you, Ben.
Great, many thanks, Iffath. That was fantastic, setting the stage. I think we'll move directly now to the presentation of the practice report. And we have Tim Clay and Cecilia Costella here to present. I also just want to remind people to please, if you have comments, thoughts, questions, please put it in the chat as we go. If you'd like to introduce yourself, please do that. Okay, over to you, Tim and Cecilia.
Can you see my screen, Ben?
Yeah, I can, yeah. If you can put it in presentation mode, though.
Is it in presentation mode yet? No?
I don't see it. Do others? There we go. It's moving. There you go. Well, now we can still see the note page though.
You can still do a note page. Sorry.
The next, they have that little next slide thing there.
Oh, you can see this. Sorry.
I'm not sure how to get rid of the.
Sorry about this.
That's okay. We got time. Still within time.
I think if you're using
And now?
There you go.
Yeah.
Now it's okay. Now it's okay. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Clay, and I work with the Partnership for Economic Inclusion. Cecilia Costella and I will be presenting PEI's latest insights on how economic inclusion programs can systematically contribute to climate resilience. Much of our thinking is based on a review of government-financed World Bank programs, and you can find a link to our latest in-practice report in the chat. However, while much of our thinking is based on World Bank programs, in our upcoming State of Economic Inclusion 2024 report, we will delve into detail into NGO and external-led programs as well. So to start, as many of you are aware, governments worldwide are grappling with a dual crisis of climate change and poverty, what we call the climate poverty nexus. This is particularly true for the poorest countries, which in effect contribute the least to climate change. This nexus is driven by both poverty constraints at the individual, community, and institutional levels, as well as climate impact drivers, including extreme and gradual climate shocks and compounding environmental degradation. Now, unless addressed, the consequences of this nexus for the poor are significant. The poor face or will face entrenched poverty and a lack of climate resilience, increased job and livelihood insecurity, which is further exacerbated by growing food insecurity due to factors such as more frequent heat waves, heavy rainfall, and droughts. And with all of that, the poor, and with few resources, the poor have limited options for adaptation and mitigation, leading to further risky behavior and further taking risks without proper resources. In response to this climate poverty nexus, there has been a paradigm shift towards climate resilient development, as defined by the IPCC, where development approaches incorporate both social and ecological systems change. Importantly, this paradigm shift has led to bilateral and multilateral financial institutions, including the World Bank and other lending institutions, to agree to the Paris alignment and other climate mandates. So they, in effect, many of the bilateral, multilateral institutions have agreed to provide a majority of their financing towards climate outcomes and indicators moving into the next fiscal year. Thank you. And now I'll pass to Cecilia Costello to talk about the potential for economic inclusion for climate resilience.
Thank you, Tim. And indeed, so there is a paradigm shift towards this climate resilient development concept. And so in our publication, we were looking to explore the ways in which economic inclusion programs can contribute to address some of those challenges at the intersection of the climate and poverty nexus. When we look at the current practice of economic inclusion, we see that these programs already have comparative advantages in this space. They are already targeted at the poorest, especially poor women, as Iffath was saying at the beginning. And these are the groups that are most impacted by climate change in rural and urban context, but also they can be environmental stewards if their constraints are removed. Economic inclusion programs are also based on multidimensional interventions, and we know already that this type of bundle interventions and approaches are more effective at building resilience than standalone approaches. And economic inclusion approaches are already focused on diversifying livelihoods, which can build resilience in general, and of course can contribute to build resilience towards climate risks. Also looking at the current state of economic inclusion programs, for instance, in the analysis that the PEI team did of World Bank finance programs, we see that a significant number of these programs already integrate climate considerations. This means, for instance, supporting natural resource management or responding to climate-related shocks, or just focused on increasing the resilience of climate-dependent activities like agriculture. However, we also see that most of these programs do not do this strategically. So they don't, they might recognize climate as a potential constraint, but they don't necessarily align their objectives or their activities in a way that strategically addresses these constraints, or that recognizes, for instance, the changing nature of climate risks over the medium and long term. So in our report, we wanted to offer a framework for economic inclusion policymakers and practitioners to start thinking strategically and systematically about integrating climate change and climate resilience into the interventions to tackle this, which we think is one of the most important challenges that development programs will face in the near and long-term future, the climate and poverty nexus, right? So the framework offers 3 principles and 3 programmatic areas of focus. The first principle is the principle of climate and poverty alignment. So essentially, this means programs should simultaneously consider the challenges that arise both from poverty and from climate risks and the interactions between them. So this could mean, for instance, aligning programs from an initial in-depth context analysis that looks at climate risk, and from there building objectives and program features and outcomes of programs that meet those challenges, those interacting challenges of climate and poverty. Of course, not all programs are going to be climate purpose, but what we suggest is that all programs can integrate some of this alignment and some of these principles. And we talk a bit more about the different levels of alignment in the report. The second principle is about policy integration, which means that programs, economic inclusion programs that want to build climate resilience should also be integrated in the ecosystem of national policies that aim to address climate resilience and climate action, from the NDCs to the national adaptation plans to large climate programs in the country. And the third principle is cross-cutting technical collaboration, meaning that from the beginning, from the design stage of programs, it'd be good to think about integrating institutions and stakeholders and different levels of government working in sectors that are relevant to these challenges, to climate and environment and poverty reduction. So the framework also proposes 3 areas of programmatic focus. One of them is adaptive safety nets, and this is a focus on programs that specifically try to help households prepare for, cope, and adapt to increasing climate shocks. A well-known example is the Niger Adaptive Safety Net program, which is helping people that are in areas affected by climate shocks through regular monthly cash transfers that build resilience, and through complementary shock response cash transfers and accompanying economic inclusion measures. Other programs might focus on food systems and ecosystems and support the long-term adaptation of these food systems to the challenges of climate change. For instance, systems in agriculture, in fisheries and forestry, and also help in the same way preserve and restore those ecosystems. So the ProClimate program in Congo is an example of such programs that focuses on climate resilient economic activities like sustainable agriculture, community forestry, non-timber forest products, and ecotourism. And the last potential area of focus that would be relevant for climate resilience is around green jobs and the green transition. And this means that programs that focus on this area can help households transition away from extractive industries, from climate-dependent sectors, to greener and more sustainable livelihoods. So, for example, the program in Costa Rica called the Sustainable Fisheries Development Project is helping fishery workers transition to sustainable fisheries management and to sectors that have a lighter impact on the environment. One thing to note is that these program areas are not mutually exclusive. So a program could have more than one focus areas, but we are suggesting that these areas help us sort of think about what are the climate resilience objectives of a program and what is the primary goal of a program. We'll hear more from Bolivia and Malawi, programs that are already thinking about these principles, integrating these focus areas. But just wanted to leave you with this framework and with the idea that through the integration of these principles, through thinking about objectives of programs around these program areas, these programs can contribute to adaptation and climate change mitigation outcomes that increase climate resilience for program participants. Thank you very much, and I look forward to further discussing with you during the quick question section.
Great, many thanks, both Tim and Cecilia. And I think people can see that the document itself was shared in the chat. If people want to get a quick look at that, I read it over the weekend and it really got me thinking. So I highly recommend it to take a look. So our first panelist is Susan Kondawe, who is the operation manager from the Community Saving and Investment Promotion Program, COMSIP, in Malawi, the government of Malawi. And so Susan, let me hand it over to you. She's going to present Malawi's Social Support for Resilient Livelihoods project. Susan, you have 9 minutes.
Thank you, Benj. As already said, I'm Susan Kondawe, and I'll not repeat the introduction so that maybe I should save my time. I will go straight to my presentation. I will present on behalf of Malawi government the Social Support for Resilient Livelihood project. And this project, before I go straight to the project, I'll just bring out the climate poverty challenges in Malawi, just to give us an overview of what is happening in Malawi. Malawi is very prone to adverse climate hazards, especially recently. And this includes dry spells, localized droughts, intense rainfall, flash floods, cyclones. We just had some Cyclone Freddy early this year. And when you look at the population of Malawi, you'd see that 80% of this population is heavily affected by the climate change hazards that are taking place. So when you look at even this 80%, you'd see that majority of these 80% are women, and these are more exposed to effects of climate change because most of the times this large population of Malawi is dependent on rain-fed agriculture, and most of these 80% population of Malawi are farmers, and they also depend so much on the natural resource-based livelihoods. And due to that, we've seen that the climate change has fueled hunger among these 80% who are the vulnerable and the ultra poor. This has happened because the climate change has led to the rise of maybe food, prices for food, where a majority of these vulnerables cannot manage to buy food at the high prices that we are currently facing. So we've seen that due to this, government of Malawi has been working tirelessly to look at other strategies and come up with policies that could help in integrating climate change in other programs that we have currently in Malawi. So as a government, we've developed some documents like policies, the National Climate Change Investment Plan, which was done to cater for 2003 to around 2018. And then we developed the National Climate Change Management Policy, which was approved in 2016. And then we have the National Adaptation Plan. We have the National Resilience Strategy of 2018. And then we have the Malawi, the Malawi National Social Support Program. The Malawi National Social Support Program is being integrated into the climate change programs that are taking place because it's targeting the ultra poor under the social protection program in Malawi. Next. When we look at the social support for resilient livelihood project itself, as a project which is addressing the challenge through climate resiliency, economic inclusion, the project itself has got three main components, and these are improving social and economic inclusion, the strengthening harmonized delivery system, the capacity building and institutional strengthening support, and the contingency emergency response. All these 5 components are interrelated in that they are all aimed at improving resilience and building sustainable livelihoods among the poor and vulnerable population and strengthen the national platform for safety nets. So that's the main objective of the SSRLP project in Malawi, and it's targeting the social cash transfer program. These are the ultra poor without labor who are just getting transfers from government, and these transfers are meant to support the beneficiaries through consumption. And then we have the Climate Smart Enhanced Public Works Program, which is also targeting the ultra poor, but the difference is that these are the ultra poor with labor. And both programs are being targeted. And in this case, we are looking at both the rural and the urban poor. I'll talk of the urban poor because the cash transfer, we have ever tried working with the urban poor in the COVID urban cash transfers in the just past year, 2021, 2022. So these are the target group, and among these project components under the improving social and economic inclusion, we have the livelihood support subcomponent, which is aimed at building the household resilience against shocks. That's where the connection comes in. And the livelihood support itself enhances the productive capacity of the households. And this is achieved through productive skills training in multi-sectoral income generating investments, and provide linkages, both financial and market linkages, to the households under these 2 programs and those that are participating in the livelihood support. And this particular subcomponent uses the savings and loan groups as the platform. So the beneficiaries of the 2 programs, cash transfer and public works, are supposed to be mobilized into groups. And these groups are the savings and loans groups where all the capacity building is delivered. The aim is to reach out to more within a short period. So the livelihood support itself targets about 590 beneficiaries of the two programs. And out of these 590, 65% are women. And for your information, about 65, about 50 something percent, 51%, 52% of the population in Malawi is women. But for when it comes to these programs, more are women. It's targeting more women, which means the vulnerability affects more women than men. And in another way, the program itself also targets 25% of the youth, because we've seen youth being marginalized in quite a number of programs. Yet it's a very productive age that can help in development activities. So the livelihood support is delivered as a sequence of packages. It has 3 packages: the basic package, enhanced, and graduation. And the interventions include the trainings, the mindset change training, which are aimed at changing the mindset of these beneficiaries from thinking that the ultra poor that needs to be supported to the extent of thinking that they can do it, they can do something for themselves to improve their household livelihood. So we also provide the joint skills groups, where we're providing the skills training, productive skills training that can lead to sustainability of the livelihood activities that are taking place at household level. Because we are targeting the youth, we also do youth skills challenge support, which is supporting the youth with the linkage to vocational skills. And when they've been trained in these vocational skills, the youth are supported with the startup equipment, where they establish their own businesses in the rural areas, and as time goes, end up recruiting colleagues, fellow youths in their projects and their businesses that they are doing. We also do the value chain support, which covers value addition and the like. And then we have the cooperative. The groups that we formed are supposed to graduate into becoming cooperative as business entities. That's another way of trying to sustain the groups and sustain the productive skills that have been delivered to these beneficiaries. And then we have the usual financial linkages and the market linkages. We know we support the beneficiaries with the productive production skills. So they need some market linkages so that they are able to have reliable markets where they can sell the products that they are producing. And in the same program, we have the graduation seed capital programs, whereby we support the poor, the households, with extra support for them, which is invested in the livelihood businesses that they've chosen and they are practicing, and they invest in that just to make sure they move faster from the poverty levels. All these programs, as we are looking at them, they are linked to the climate change. How is it done? It's because in the first place, these beneficiaries are involved in climate smart public works, where they are doing community projects that result in catchment management, whereby they are doing water and soil conservation. And they have several projects where they are working with, they are doing soirees, water, the stone barns and the like. So as they are doing that, they combine with the livelihood activities, which brings in the economic inclusion, and with the climate change activities that are taking place within their communities. They help in doing that. And in fact, even the businesses that they camp, they start practicing as households. The businesses themselves are most of the times related to the climate change activities that are taking place, the interventions that are taking place within their communities. You would see some are into honey production, just to make sure they conserve the forest that is within their areas. Others are into tree seedlings production, whereby they are able to sell the seedlings at the same time when the seeds are planted, the trees are planted. They are able to sell some of the fruits and even conserve the forest or the environment that they have within. Next.
Susan, could I just ask you to draw to a close? It's been 9 minutes. Yeah, sure. Okay, those are just pictures showing out some of the interventions that are taking place, the savings mobilization and the women empowerment economic activities, where a certain group is doing bakery. Next. Yeah, so on collaborations, in this project, there is quite a good network of collaboration with several institutions. So work together with government ministries. All the government ministries are syndicated under the thematic team. All those ministries, the local government, economic planning and development, gender, where we're working with the cash transfers, youth, all those, including agriculture and natural resources. And the trade part, where we're working with the Ministry of Trade, where they register the cooperatives. We also work with the National Local Government Finance Committee and COMSEP. And as we're working there on the ground, as we're going to the grassroots, we work with several
district councils and extension workers at grassroots level. These are government extension workers. The purpose why we work with all these is because we want to bring in sustainability of the activities that are taking place even after the project life. So all this network is done probably, and it's well coordinated, resulting in sustainability and continuity of all the programs, despite the program, even when the project has ended. So after the project life, the activities do continue because government structures are involved. And then the other one is just a picture showing some of the financial leakages, one of the beneficiaries being supported at a bank, as it has been said. Next. So we have quite a number of challenges that we faced, lessons learned and opportunities in this project. We are just about 4 years into the project. We are remaining with 3 more years to come because the project will end in 2027. We have several opportunities. One of the opportunities, the diverse government structures which we work with and which has brought experienced human resource in climate change and management and economic inclusion interventions. Apart from that, we also have the urban setup, which provides more diverse areas for scale up of economic inclusion interventions. Unlike in the rural areas where we've always been working with, we've seen it working in urban areas, and we've seen quite a number of opportunities when we work with the urban poor. And then with the other opportunities, the leveraging of the technology. We are bringing in digitization of transactions in all the in all the activities that we're doing, all the interventions. The cash transfers are being done through digitization, e-payments and the like, even when it comes to support in line with the financial leakages for the members in the SLGs. The other opportunity is the use of local structures, who are usually used at the grassroots level when we're working with these beneficiaries. And we've seen sustainability of these activities through these local animators, because even after the extension workers are not there, the local animators, like the community facilitators, the lead farmers and the like, do continue with the interventions and working with the communities without any problems. However, we've faced some challenges. Mainly the 2 challenges that I'll mention here are the disaster risks, which have always come in because we've never been well prepared for that. These risks usually erode the gains that have been made in economic empowerment activities at household level, whereby households could lose everything that they had. And then we have the high literacy levels among the ultra poor, which affects ability to understand and comprehend some of the contents that are usually delivered during the trainings that are done to the ultra poor in SLGs. And we have some lessons that we've learned. The major 3 lessons are: the first one is the complementing the lesson of whereby we've seen that complementing the climate change management activities with cash plus interventions for household livelihood improvement we've seen that this helps a lot in building resilience against the climate shocks at household level. So this is being practiced in this particular project, the SSRLP, and we've seen it making a great change, a great movement, whereby we've seen some households that are very poor and they have been involved in the savings and loans activities, but with the knowledge they've gained in the climate change management activities that are taking place in their communities, they are able to comprehend and harmonize the two and able to practice even their businesses to make sure they don't destroy their environment, and they make sure they maintain and manage the environment they are living in. We've also had another lesson of incorporation of climate change modules in capacity building curriculum. This has helped a lot in building awareness and preparedness against shocks in the ultra poor, the vulnerables. Those members that have been in SLGs, they've been trained, or maybe they've been made aware, sensitized on the risks that come with the climate change issues. They have been well prepared and they are able to build resilience against the shocks. Whenever the shocks come in, they are able to have maybe financial savings and the like, and maybe some assets that they are falling on that cushion them on. And the last lesson was the partnership with other stakeholders, including those in private sectors. This has allowed the incorporation of diverse ideas and sustainability of economic resilience initiatives. When we work with these partners, even including the private sector partners, we've seen that there are quite a number of diverse ideas that come in that are incorporated and are practiced and maybe rolled out as we're implementing the interventions, several interventions. And this has helped us a lot. And unlike maybe working individuals, government only, maybe private sector only. And we've seen this working in Malawi in the current SSRIRP project, whereby that harmonization and collaboration among several sectors, including private sector, is really working well and bringing in positive and good results. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Susan. Perhaps if I can just add, I mean, I've been following the questions in the chat. There's a lot of interesting questions in terms of the details around the nature of the climate resistant and the climate adaptation, let's say, techniques, and how to better engage with the Ministry of Agriculture. There was also a number of questions around targeting and perhaps how that targeting may change when you bring in the climate resilience dimension to these economic inclusion programs. And so I'm wondering if just very quickly in 1 minute, if you could just comment upon this issue of targeting. Does it change? Does the nature of vulnerability change when you're considering the climate resilience in terms of whether you're targeting the individuals or households, et cetera? Very briefly.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you. I would say that when it comes to targeting these vulnerable households, what we did was to harmonize, maybe to bring in the climate adaptation activities in the social protection program. So when it came to targeting these members, they are already targeted as the ultra poor in the main programs of cash transfer and the climate smart public works. So the targeting itself is based on the vulnerability of the households themselves, where I indicated that the cash transfer are those that are ultra poor but have no labor, while the climate smart are the ultra poor with labor. So the climate smart are able to work in community climate change activities, while they get maybe just some wages. They work for about 12 days in a month and get paid a little something to supplement their consumption. It's mainly for consumption. While the livelihood support brings in the cash plus interventions. So these interventions are extra to what they are already doing in the main project, in the main programs, where they are coming up with soirees, infiltration pits, just to make sure they are conserving their water and soil in that particular community. So in addition to that, we bring in the capacity building of those that are willing to be in the groups. Of course, for them to be in the groups, it's supposed to be voluntary. So those, when we've done the awareness, those that are they are willing to be in groups, they come in, and then we bring in the extra activities that are additional to the cash they are getting. So these interventions that come in are coming in to build their economic resilience. So we bring in diversification of maybe income generating activities. We bring in the mindset change trainings, that is the financial literacy, business management, just to make sure that apart from conserving the environment as they are doing in the main program of public works, they can also do something else to compensate or maybe to add, to complement whatever they're doing. So this livelihood support brings in the economic activities, inclusion activities. So that's where they're doing the financial savings, that's where they're doing the business management training skills. They do the productive skills like maybe piggery, livestock farming, things like those, irrigation, all those come in. And this is what this is what is key to building their resilience at household level. So apart from doing the climate, the community work that is being done, the trainings and the businesses they're practicing in are done at household level. So these complement what is done as a community, but at household level, they also practice the same things that are being done at the community. If they are supposed to plant trees in the community, maybe in the areas, maybe the hilly areas in their community, they also practice the same at household level. They'll plant maybe, instead of just maybe the forest trees, they'll be planting maybe the fruit trees within their household, just to make sure they're also planting trees, but they'll be gaining because they'll be eating the fruits. And if they have planted so many fruit trees, they'll be able to sell some of those fruits. So it's a matter of complementing each other. So the livelihood support is the one which is very key to the building of the resilience of the household level.
Okay, excellent. No, thank you, Susan. Thank you for that. Maybe let's move to the next panelist. Let me introduce Johnny Delgadillo, who's the program coordinator of Empoderar from the Ministry of Rural Development and Land Use of the government of Bolivia. and he will be presenting Bolivia's Innovation for Resilient Food Systems program. So Johnny, 9 minutes, por favor.
Muy buenos días a todos. Muy buenos días, soy Johnny Delgadillo. Soy el coordinador general del programa Empoderar del gobierno de Bolivia.
Disculpa, Johnny, no se oye muy bien. No sé si se puede acercar un poquito al micrófono. No sé si... Ya. Si se puede acercar. Yeah, Johnny, you have your mute.
¿Me escucha?
Ahí va.
¿Me escucha? ¿Me escucha? Ahora sí, ¿me escuchan? Bueno, continuamos entonces. Como les decía, soy el coordinador general del programa Empoderar del Ministerio de Desarrollo Rural y Tierras del Gobierno de Bolivia. Si podríamos avanzar, por favor, en las diapositivas. Bolivia es un país abigarrado, muy diverso en temas de clima y también de topografía. Tenemos muchas áreas en las áreas alturas desde 7.000 bolivianos, desde 7.000 metros sobre el nivel del mar hasta los 4.000 metros 400 metros sobre el nivel del mar, ¿no? Si me permite, tengo dificultades con la presentación en inglés. Hay zonas con exceso de precipitaciones y hay zonas también con déficit hídrico. Bolivia tiene más o menos entre 12 y 14 millones de bolivianos habitantes, de los cuales el 30% está en el área rural. Contamos aproximadamente con 800 unidades productivas de pequeños productores que tiene en sus manos alrededor de 1 millón de hectáreas productivas, de las cuales 400.000 hectáreas están bajo riego, correspondiendo a la época de verano 0.7 hectáreas por pequeño productor y en la época de invierno de 0.3 hectáreas por pequeño productor. Pasemos la próxima diapositiva, por favor. Las inversiones que ha venido haciendo el programa Empoderar a lo largo de los años ha tenido bastante impacto, especialmente en reducción de la pobreza. Como ustedes pueden ver, en un financiamiento inicial que tuvimos a partir del año 2006, la reducción, la diferencia que ha generado en rangos de comparación con similares en las mismas áreas, reducción de la pobreza moderada ha sido de 11 puntos en comparación y en extrema pobreza, 5 puntos en reducción de la pobreza. En el último financiamiento que hemos concluido recientemente, hemos tenido una reducción de la pobreza en comparación con los similares del 12%, como también en la extrema pobreza de puntos similares. Esto quiere decir que hemos trabajado en sectores realmente de pequeños productores con indicadores de pobreza bastante altos y el impacto del proyecto en la reducción en un año ha sido también bastante significativo estadísticamente. Se ha mejorado el 58% el ingreso de los pequeños productores en las áreas donde hemos trabajado y como promedio, siendo del estrato más alto un promedio del 170% la mejora del ingreso y el récord que hemos tenido es del 300% de mejoras en el ingreso de los productores que en mejor situación se encuentran. Se ha incrementado 52% la productividad de los pequeños productores, el 58% de las ventas y 9% el incremento del precio también de las ventas de los pequeños productores. Es decir, que se ha trabajado bastante en el incremento de los rendimientos, como también en el incremento de la calidad de la producción de los pequeños productores. Hemos logrado desestacionalizar la producción de varios productos en el país que solamente se producían en la época de verano. Ahora los pequeños productores se están produciendo también en las épocas de déficit alimentario en el país, que corresponde a las épocas frías y secas que tenemos el segundo semestre de cada año en Bolivia. El destino de la producción ha sido para consumo nacional. El 70% de la canasta familiar está abastecida en Bolivia por los pequeños productores, pero también hemos fortalecido los rubros de exportación tradicionales de los pequeños productores, ¿no? Como es el tema del café, del cacao, banano, piñas tropicales, también sésamo y otros productos que son exclusivos de la agricultura familiar, ¿no? Donde se ha potenciado bastante y existen buenas perspectivas de continuar adelante en nuevos rubros también que estamos emprendiendo con los pequeños productores. El desafío que tenemos hacia adelante es el desafío de enfrentar precisamente el tema del cambio climático. En las anteriores inversiones hemos invertido más del 70% de los recursos del programa Empoderar en uso y manejo de agua, precisamente para garantizar la producción de los pequeños productores y además insertar nuevas tecnologías, nuevos paquetes tecnológicos que nos lleven al propósito de mejorar la producción y también de mejorar los rendimientos y ser resilientes al cambio climático, ¿no? Vamos a continuar en esa perspectiva de seguir invirtiendo en el uso y manejo de agua para la agricultura y la ganadería, especialmente en el sector más pobre, ¿no? Como ustedes pueden ver, de acuerdo a la programación planificación que se ha hecho en Bolivia, de acuerdo a los dos últimos censos de población y también agropecuario, tenemos la población dividida en categorías. La categoría A corresponde a la población mayor vulnerable que se encuentra precisamente en zonas más deprimidas, donde la producción es un desafío. Nosotros con las iniciativas de los pequeños productores y los paquetes tecnológicos que estamos implementando, precisamente le estamos dando nuevas alternativas para salir adelante a estas familias, ¿no? Vamos a continuar en las familias de categoría A, especialmente priorizando estas comunidades que son alrededor de 1,100 comunidades que vamos a beneficiar a más de 35,000 familias en estas comunidades, empezando por los grupos de mujeres, porque consideramos que los grupos de mujeres son muy vulnerables, ¿no? Las experiencias que hemos tenido en anteriores inversiones nos demuestran que nuestras inversiones igualan el ingreso de las mujeres con el también de los varones, ¿no? O sea, en una sola intervención se da este fenómeno, digamos, debido al enfoque que tiene de igualdad entre productores varones y productores mujeres dentro de nuestras intervenciones, ¿no? Después vamos a continuar también con respuesta del Plan de Desarrollo Económico Social que tiene el gobierno de Bolivia para la gestión 21-25 y también tenemos la contribución nacionalmente determinada para el sector agropecuario, fundamentalmente en la reducción de los gases de efecto invernadero. El programa de Alianzas Rurales 3 es un nuevo desafío que estamos comenzando. El objetivo general es contribuir a aumentar la seguridad alimentaria, el acceso a mercados y la adopción de enfoques climáticamente inteligentes por parte de los beneficiarios del proyecto, ¿no? La focalización está en pequeños productores rurales que se ubica en el territorio nacional, en los 9 departamentos que tiene Bolivia, 212 provincias, 341 municipios, o sea, vamos a abarcar todo el área rural de Bolivia. Bolivia tiene una extensión de 1,098,000 kilómetros cuadrados, donde la prioridad, como les dije anteriormente, va a continuar siendo los grupos de mujeres líderes de hogar, los jóvenes, los pueblos indígenas minoritarios. Bolivia, según la Constitución, reconoce a 36 grupos indígenas. En el área rural, más del 90% se autoidentifican como un grupo indígena, pero sin embargo existen grupos indígenas minoritarios, ¿no? Y también tenemos las organizaciones de comunidades afectadas por algunos desastres naturales precisamente generadas a través del cambio climático, ¿no? Actualmente estamos viviendo una emergencia de más de 120 municipios en el país con emergencias por el tema de sequía, ¿no? Con el componente de vulnerabilidad, con el componente de mejorar los sistemas productivos, especialmente de las mujeres en las comunidades más vulnerables, vamos a llegar, como les decía, a 35,000 familias que tienen altos niveles de necesidades básicas insatisfechas y bajo valor bruto de la producción. Nosotros vamos a incidir incrementando el valor bruto de la producción y mejorando sus capacidades de resiliencia ante el cambio climático, ¿no? Vamos a trabajar en el resto de las comunidades, o sea, las categorías B, C, D y E, más o menos llegando a 38,370 familias que están agrupadas en organizaciones de pequeños productores. Vamos a incidir mejorando su acceso al mercado, ¿no? Incrementando su desempeño productivo y también comercial. Vamos a ejecutar más o menos 1,200 proyectos o subproyectos con estos grupos de productores que están aliados con sus mercados. Para nosotros, el tema de atención a estos grupos de productores es para incrementar sus sistemas productivos, incrementar su producción. En ningún caso hemos tratado de sustituir sus inversiones o sustituir, digamos, el esfuerzo que hace el pequeño productor actualmente, sino se trata de atender el crecimiento de los pequeños productores que tenemos en el país. Tenemos un tercer componente donde estamos viendo que la necesidad que tienen tanto las comunidades vulnerables como también estos grupos de productores que están ligados hacia los mercados tienen necesidades de articularse en mejores condiciones, y la dificultad mayor que tiene el país es precisamente las vías de comunicación, y juegan un factor determinante la existencia o inexistencia de puentes sobre los ríos, puesto que en época de verano, donde hay persistentes lluvias, es también la época de mayor producción, y estos pequeños productores no pueden sacar sus productos hacia los mercados, y por lo tanto vamos a entrar en el componente de infraestructura productiva y vamos a apoyar a los gobiernos municipales en sus competencias, en sus atribuciones para la construcción de puentes, mejoramiento de camino y también la construcción de sistemas de riego. Vamos a la siguiente diapositiva, por favor.
Johnny, le puedo pedir que se vaya cerrando, solamente por el tiempo, gracias.
El PAR 3 tiene 3 componentes, ¿no? El primer componente que apoya precisamente a las comunidades más vulnerables, el segundo subcomponente a las organizaciones de productores, y el tercer componente a lo que les decía, la construcción de estos sistemas de apoyo de infraestructura. Los asociados o colaboradores son el Ministerio de Desarrollo Rural y Tierras, que tenemos dependencia. Trabajamos como programa Empoderar en coordinación con los gobiernos autónomos municipales, con los gobiernos autónomos indígenas originarios campesinos y los gobiernos departamentales, ¿no? Con un cofinanciamiento que se puede dar entre estos niveles, ¿no? También tenemos asociaciones técnicas y financieras como organizaciones comunitarias, organizaciones de productores rurales de los 9 departamentos. Trabajamos activamente con los movimientos sociales que existen en Bolivia y también con otras instituciones emergentes, ¿no? de innovación. Los retos que tenemos es contribuir a la reducción de la pobreza de más de 127,000 familias de productores rurales, sacar a la gente, a las comunidades de la categoría A por proporcionándoles una mejor alternativa, ¿no es cierto? Y mejorando su capacidad de resiliencia también de más de 127,000 familias. Vamos a aportar las metas de reducción de gases de efecto invernadero. Este indicador va a ser medido constantemente y permanentemente en cada subproyecto, el aporte que se hace. Al incremento de la resiliencia del sector agropecuario de Bolivia y de la contribución nacionalmente determinada para el país, ¿no? Y las próximas etapas, sí, las próximas etapas son que vamos a mejorar todas las lecciones aprendidas que tenemos en el proyecto de alianzas rurales, en su primera fase y segunda fase. Se van a mejorar las oportunidades para la generación de ingresos también, al acceso a mercados, a la sostenibilidad ambiental y a la resiliencia al cambio climático de todas las iniciativas de los pequeños productores. La generación de estas estrategias va a mejorar la productividad, la diversificación, la adaptación a prácticas más sostenibles también en el país, ¿no? Vamos a promover inversiones que respondan al plan de acción del cambio climático, también del Banco Mundial, que se ha planteado para el 2021 y 2025 con un enfoque de desarrollo sostenible ambientalmente, ¿no? Muchas gracias. Ese es cuanto puedo exponer por el momento y estoy atento a las preguntas.
Muchas gracias, Johnny, ¿no? Súper interesante. Yo creo que vamos a pasar al próximo ponente y pues retomamos las preguntas del último momento, ¿no? Digamos, del webinar, ¿no? Next, I would like to move to Manan Donahue, who's a senior researcher at the Brookings Institute. I mean, the way this is rolling out is that so far we've gone through 2 of the 3 climate resilient economic inclusion pathways. The first was the adaptive safety nets in Malawi. The second was the food and ecosystem services in Bolivia. And now we're going to talk about the third way, which is green jobs and the green transition. And so he'll reflect on what this means for the poorest. Now, economic inclusion programs can address this in forthcoming transition. So please, Manan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ben. Let me just share my screen here. 1 second. Okay. Okay, hopefully that's full screen now. Can you see that fine?
Yes,
yep.
That's good.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. My name is Manan Donahue. I'm a senior research associate at the Brookings Institution, where I primarily focus on climate and environmental justice and equity for US domestic policy specifically. And when I think about what justice and equity means in a context of climate policy, I come back most often to this pathway, that is green jobs and the green transition. So the word green here is maybe a little ambiguous, but it's intended to be somewhat of a catch-all. We're talking about interventions that help households and communities move out of extractive or climate-sensitive sectors into greener ones, as well as contribute to a green transition. Broadly defines their positions involved in carrying out activities with an environmental benefit. In practice, what this often means is retraining and reskilling, particularly with an emphasis on local value chains. This third pathway is really focused on ensuring that the impacts of climate change and the disruption of a transition to a more sustainable economy do not come at the costs of the livelihoods and employment security of those relying on the most vulnerable industries, like agriculture and fishing, and those dependent on extractive industries like mining, for example. As we know, the poorest are often more dependent on livelihoods like these that are uniquely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. For example, the formal mining sector employs about 3.7 million workers worldwide, and up to 100 million people will make a living from artisanal or small-scale mining, most of which live below the poverty line. To put that figure into perspective, jobs in the renewable sector are estimated to have reached about 11.5 million globally in 2019, and a much smaller percentage of those jobs are available to the poorest as well. So there's some pretty big gaps, and I raised these figures to highlight 2 points. First, that there's a monumental gap between the jobs needed to deliver a rapid and transformative decarbonization. And second, there are also substantial opportunities for job creation, not just job loss, as part of a green transition. Not only are these jobs going to be necessary to the individuals and communities reliant upon extractive sectors, but they're also relevant to achieving a green transition at all. We tend to think about the poorest as only vulnerable to climate impacts without considering the other side of the story, and that is the opportunity for this group to help drive a transition. And I don't want to imply here that the poorest countries have an outsized role to play in a green transition. It's worth remembering and highlighting now that the US has contributed the most to cumulative global greenhouse gas emissions historically, and along with the European countries should have an outsized role in funding a green transition. However, the poorest, and especially those in resource-dependent and extraction-dependent sectors, should, at least in my opinion, be some of the first to benefit from the opportunities created from a green transition. I want to focus in now a little bit more on the context that I can speak to the best, which is the US. And while the US obviously differs from the other countries we've heard about already, they're still reckoning with the same questions of how to deliver a green transition, and particularly in an inclusive and an equitable way. In the US, there tends to be a bit of a mysticism about green jobs, but many green jobs are just jobs. They're jobs that already exist. They're likely to involve work-based learning, like apprenticeships for construction. They're jobs like electricians, roofers, plumbers, recycling collectors. At least in the US, most of these jobs don't require a 4-year college degree. They pay competitive wages, and they're in industries that already have massive hiring needs that are going to increase. At Brookings, we've estimated that America will need about 32 million new workers just in infrastructure and other construction-related occupations over the next decade to deliver on decarbonization commitments. However, there's a substantial gap between demand and supply, with prospective workers not having flexible avenues to get the needed on-the-job training. This is especially true for younger people, for women, and for people of color who face other structural barriers within the US to accessing services for reskilling. And because of this, developing not just training programs, but inclusive and accessible training programs is critical to ensure that the broadest range of individuals can benefit from these new opportunities. While the conditions are different in the context where economic inclusion programs are operating, we can tease out some general parallels. The importance of training, an emphasis not necessarily on new jobs, but on new applications of old ones, and the need also for inclusive approaches. In somewhat of an inverse way to how poverty and climate change impacts can amplify the effects of each other, entrenching poverty and limiting adaptive capacity, providing opportunities into green jobs can act as a poverty alleviation tool in ways that build household adaptive capacity and even community resilience by providing access to diversified supply chains. There's an element of this pathway that's just getting households out of the most and livelihoods that are the most impacted by climate change. But there's also the opportunity to provide employment pathways out of poverty while filling the tremendous skills gap needed for a green transition. For me, this is the opportunity that I want to highlight from economic inclusion programs that we can look towards moving forward. And that's how these programs can contribute to not just climate resilience, but to building the workforce needed for a green transition as well. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Thanks to all the other speakers.
No, thank you very much, Manan, for that. Now we can open it up for questions from the participants. Perhaps let me put one forward, just taking what I've seen from the questions that have been coming up on the chat. One is, I think there's been a lot of focus when we talk about inclusion, particularly around gender and being and the issue of women. And my question for whoever would like to answer is, beyond just targeting a program towards women, right? In this context of economic inclusion and climate resilience, what special characteristics do the programs need to have in order to have a transformative impact in terms of women's empowerment? Is it beyond just targeting, or are there programmatic elements that need to be included? Would anyone like to answer that?
I can give it a try.
Please.
I think it's a very important question and something that keeps coming up. Essentially, like, do we need to think about different features of programs because they are now focusing on achieving climate-related outcomes? And I think from my perspective, I think we don't actually know enough. There was a question about whether we have evidence on these programs and whether they're achieving their outcomes. The reality is that we don't have a lot of evidence on economic inclusion programs and social protection programs in the way that they achieve climate-related outcomes in particular, because these programs do not integrate features strategically, and they don't get evaluated, or if they do integrate it, they don't get evaluated. So I think that the short answer is we don't know. But I think if we look at the experiences and the examples we have, I would say that targeting is a very important aspect. So what are the groups that you want to reach, and how they are what type of challenges they face because of climate change, and how are these challenges different because of climate related constraints. But also I think there is a lot of emphasis to be placed on the type of benefits, the type of interventions that we stimulate, because so for instance, I think something that's come up in the two case studies in Bolivia and Malawi, we can set up this livelihood support interventions, but if we do not consider the risk that people face from increasing disasters, for instance, we will lose whatever we created whenever a disaster happens, right? So how do we adjust interventions in a way that take into account both the need of women and other vulnerable groups to increase, to diversify their livelihoods, to increase their incomes, but also to be protected against disasters, right? And how do we consider that the livelihoods that they might need to diversify right now might be different in 10 years because of the green transition, right? So all of these issues are intertwined. And I think when we think about the package of interventions that we're giving to people, we need to consider these different risks and these different sort of current and future constraints that climate change brings about. It seems that Ben is frozen. I don't know if he still can hear us. I think we've lost Ben.
Johnny, do you want to come in? I see your hand is raised.
Sí, perfectamente. Bueno, yo creo que para facilitar el acceso de las mujeres, primero hay que promover un acceso real a los activos productivos, ¿no? De Bolivia, por ejemplo, tenemos el caso de la titulación de la tierra, que en los últimos 15 años también hay la oportunidad de que se pueda titular a nombre de la mujer la tierra, ¿no es cierto? Entonces, hay un potencial de empoderamiento de las mujeres en la posesión de las tierras. Actualmente está superando el 40% de los pequeños productores que están titulados a nombre también de las mujeres. Los incentivos son fundamentales que deben ofrecer los proyectos para que las mujeres puedan acceder también a estos beneficios, ¿no? Lógicamente tratando en todos estos la participación en primera instancia individual de las mujeres y después en colectivo también de la comunidad en su conjunto, ¿no? Y dentro del trabajo constante de los proyectos, su tratamiento igualitario. Es por eso que nosotros hemos podido igualar dentro de todos los proyectos que financiamos, igualar el ingreso de las mujeres y el de los varones también, igualando esa brecha económica que es muy grande en el área rural.
Thanks. So my apologies. I got a Zoom reboot from FAO right in the middle of that, so it was obligatory. Sorry about that. So I assume that was a response to, again, follow up to the question on gender. No. A second question I had that I wanted to suggest, as I guess we're waiting for some more questions to come up, is around this again. This responds to a question that was in the chat around tenure, access to land, right? And here, in the particular context of Indigenous peoples or collective tenure, particularly given the, let's say, the oversized role that Indigenous peoples and local communities play in addressing, particularly on climate change mitigation, but also in terms of adaptation. Has there been how do these programs, maybe this is maybe the case in Bolivia, can respond? Have the programs been somewhat modified, let's say, or how do they respond to the issue where collective access to tenure is an important part of the climate resilience response, let's say?
En Bolivia, más del 70% de la población rural se autoidentifica como indígena, ¿no? Con algún grupo indígena. Son 36 grupos indígenas, tenemos grupos mayoritarios como los quechuas, está en primer lugar, aymaras después y después guaraníes, y el resto son grupos minoritarios. El proyecto, el programa Empoderar ha podido llegar al 90% de los beneficiarios que se autoidentifican como indígenas, ¿no? Hemos apoyado la iniciativa de ellos mismos, o sea, las propuestas de apoyo y de mejoras que se pueda dar en sus sistemas productivos ha sido a partir de la misma iniciativa de los pequeños productores. Hemos tenido un fuerte proceso también de organización en grupos de productores que estén legalmente establecidos y puedan también tener relaciones con el sistema financiero a posterior del apoyo del programa Empoderar. Su articulación con el mercado también ha sido clave porque les ha permitido realmente verificar sus ventas, mejorar sus ingresos y por lo tanto ellos tienen la iniciativa de continuar hacia adelante, digamos, haciendo sostenible las inversiones que por única vez ha hecho el proyecto de alianzas rurales en sus lugares de producción, ¿no?
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Johnny, por esta respuesta, ¿no? Let me just see if there's another in the chat that just came up there. I guess, well, this is a question. There was a question in the earlier chat which I lost when I lost my Zoom, which was also regarding, because we heard from Manan, let's say, about the content of green jobs in the US. How does that vary when you're looking at let's say, a low-income context where obviously a much larger share of the workforce is in agriculture or in agri-food systems, right? Where there may be, let's say, the clear, the skill. I mean, many of the green jobs may not as be high skilled, let's say, right? Particularly when you talk about trying to make the agriculture process more green, right? And so, if you have any reflections, or if any of the colleagues have any reflections on what that transition looks like, let's say in a low-income context in terms of green jobs.
I can just start off and mention 2 high-level points, and then would love to hear for some more specific local examples if other panelists have them. But at a high level, and Cecilia highlighted this up front, is that you want to make sure that these programs are responding to local needs. So, the examples I highlighted in the US speak very much to the infrastructural gaps that the US is reckoning with. But exactly, they should be responsive to the needs in local supply chains. What are the assets that the community already has? And then the other thing I wanted to say as well is not just an understanding of the local dynamics, for example, market dynamics and supply chains, but also local climate vulnerabilities as well, which vary substantially between regions. So moving ahead with those 2 key principles and understanding those key things should help drive the selection for what's targeted when you're thinking about green jobs programs.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else have a comment on that? Otro comentario? si no, tengo una pregunta relacionada, and I have another question which is kind of related in the sense that obviously, I mean, a lot of the, and this is even a, I mean, it's a broader question for economic inclusion programs in general, but it's I think it's quite specific when we get to climate resilience. Is obviously a lot of these projects are around training, capacity development, life building skills to be able to participate in different economic activities, right? And when a lot of, let's say, the social protection or social assistance programs originate in social ministries, it requires a lot of, let's say, institutional collaboration with, agricultural ministries and other ministries which are more focused on livelihoods, right? And when you bring in the climate resilience, or even you could even be bringing in, the third ministry, let's say, right? And so I'm wondering, what are some of the institutional challenges and how you've resolved them in terms of bridging across sectors and ministries and implementing these programs? I don't know if Susan, if you have I thought about this when I was listening to your presentation. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
Yes, of course, the collaboration comes in because of the diverse or maybe multi-sectoral nature of the project itself. It involves quite a number of interventions that involve different sectors in the ministries. So Ministry of Agriculture is one of the ministries that we collaborate with, especially in climate change. So they are involved even starting from the designing and planning of the project itself. So even when it comes to implementation of the interventions that are related to agricultural activities, we implement the interventions with the Ministry of Agriculture staff, including the extension workers at grassroots level, where they are assisting. Maybe they are involved in the implementation of agricultural activities, interventions that we have. When it comes to production skills, farming production skills, including we have these interventions, this intervention that we call actionable climate smart agriculture. This is an intervention that where we use the agricultural extension workers, where we are using the modern agricultural methods of farming, just the methods that are able to help the farmers mitigate their products against the climate change that we are facing. We've been facing a lot of floods and including droughts, and all these are handled when it comes to what type of crops are they supposed to grow, or what type of methods of farming are they supposed to use for them to still yield something despite these shocks or maybe these disasters coming in. So we work with Ministry of Agriculture, starting from the planning stage, the designing of the project itself, the planning stage, the planning of the coming up with the right interventions that are needed at household level as well as at community level, even at group level. Remember, I said we deliver at SLG level, as the platform is the savings and loans groups. So the Ministry of Agriculture is one of the main, maybe the key stakeholder in this particular project, and they play quite a big role. So they are aware of the project starting from the designing up to the implementation stage. We do it with the Ministry of Agriculture. Sure.
Okay, so I think that's a great lesson learned in terms of what has to happen institutionally for something to work successfully. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask Cecilia around if she could talk briefly around the recommendations from the report moving forward. Kind of what are some next steps? Thanks.
Yes, thanks, Ben. Yeah, we have a number of recommendations in the report. I'll just talk about some of them briefly. The first one is sort of going back to this idea of focusing on the climate and poverty nexus, and meaning that idea of aligning with that climate and poverty nexus. So for programs to think strategically about what are the climate considerations that they need to take into account today and in the near future and in the medium term, right? This is something that is essential even for projects that are not necessarily, climate purpose, even if the main objective of the program is not to achieve climate resilience. it's going to be necessary for all programs, for all economic inclusion programs, and for all development programs, really to take climate change into account. So this is kind of first and very obvious recommendation. And then this idea of collaboration and inclusive planning, that will be key. I think this tends to be a very generic recommendation that we always, say, well, we need to collaborate more, and it's very difficult to actually collaborate more. But when it, as you were just pointing out, when it comes to climate change, it doesn't, it's not one sector, it's several sectors, and it just cuts across all issues. I was quite, I thought it was quite interesting, both, the examples from Malawi and from Bolivia, how they sort of touch on this point. Essentially, Malawi having this like structures to collaborate, kind of replicate at all levels, even to the the lowest level, administrative level, where you can have representatives of this government sectors, right, involved in the projects. And then on the other hand, Johnny referred to, for instance, integrating with climate policies, ensuring that the program is also a way of contributing to the climate goals of the country, to the carbon emissions sort of goals and capture, carbon emission reduction and capture goals. So that collaboration and that integration needs to happen at various levels, at the policy level and at the implementation level. And I think in as much as we continue to say this, I think really when it comes to climate change, it's one of the most challenging and most important areas of focus going forward. And then a couple more very quickly recommendations is that we need to build a learning agenda around this topic. As we know, we've just discussed, and there was some of the questions that touched upon this. We don't really have a lot of evidence. The PEI team is starting to work on this impact collaborative to measure some of the evidence of programs around climate resilience, which is great. But all economic inclusion programs should start thinking about this. And finally, of course, the financing, right? And how do we finance programs focused on climate resilience? And I think we need to consider that when it comes to climate change, there are new avenues that could be interesting, from the large climate funds to recycling revenues from carbon-related reforms in countries. For instance, when like energy subsidies are removed, can that money be reinvested in social programs, including social protection or economic inclusion programs, and just think about the need of developing countries in particular to use concessional finance for adaptation, which is going to be essential, for the future in terms of the impacts of climate change. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Cecilia. I guess next we should move. So before we close the event, just to summarize the event, they would like to take a Zoom poll. Actually, Johnny would like to say something. Johnny, ¿quieres hacer un comentario antes de que pasamos?
Sí, quería, contribuir a lo que decía Cecilia. Estamos en los programas y proyectos considerando el tema de sostenibilidad, el tema de rentabilidad financiera de las iniciativas, digamos, como base fundamental para los modelos de sostenibilidad que tenemos de las inversiones que estamos realizando. Pero creo que es necesario que se considere a nivel global también, paralelamente o adicionalmente a estas inversiones, considerar también inversiones ambientales que no van a tener el rédito financiero o rentabilidad financiera que se espera. Entonces, yo creo que hay que sumar estos recursos que estamos canalizando a los productores pequeños en nuestros países, digamos, para garantizar un mejor futuro ambiental, inversiones también ambientales que vayan a complementar todo este esfuerzo que estamos realizando, ¿no?
No, very good. Muchísimas gracias, ¿no? Buen punto para cerrar, ¿no? Okay, ¿cómo funciona el próximo? How does the next step work in terms of the Zoom poll?
The Zoom poll will just pop up on the screen.
Okay.
Whenever, yeah.
Okay, so the question is, would you use ideas and materials from this session for your future work in this area? strongly agree, agree, don't know, disagree, strongly disagree. The second one is, would you recommend this series of webinars to your colleagues? With the same options. We're getting there. 50% have participated. We're still missing half. I have to admit, I'm having troubles on my iPad here figuring out how to vote because it doesn't respond. But now we're okay. Well, 56%. Okay. Great, many thanks. Okay, so maybe just a few words to close this up. Well, first, I think it's a super important document. It's a very important effort, I think, to bring together these different strands of work, economic inclusion with all the work around climate resilience. There's obviously a lot already happening, as we can see by the presentations today, right? And it's a very natural fit, I would say, in programming and also just conceptually, no? But of course, there's a lot of specificities, right? And it's perhaps even more multi-sectoral, right? So it's not all straightforward. I think there's a lot of implementation, institutional issues that are still being worked out. And so I think these are important first experiences, and as was highlighted, we need to generate a lot of learning to see what works in different contexts, in what situations. I think it's also a super important argument for increased financing towards adaptation, right? And this should be one vehicle, let's say, for financing adaptation, because as we know, adaptation is, it's one of the in terms of climate justice, it's really one of the key aspects in terms of the fact that the poor people in poor countries didn't generate greenhouse gases. The rich did, yet they're paying the highest price, right? And so, adaptation is one key way, let's say, for more vulnerable households to adjust, and the financing is woefully inadequate. So I think this could be an important route, let's say, to increase that financing. And finally, I think it is important to stress, as Manan mentioned in his presentation around, I think this needs to be underpinned by this idea of climate justice, right? And the fact that, again, that it's the poor communities, particularly in rural areas, are the ones that are more vulnerable, that are paying the price, whereas it's the rich individuals in the rich countries who have caused the problem and continue causing the problem, right? And so I think this is an important redistributive mechanism, let's say, to address that issue, and I think needs to underpin. So with that, thanks again for joining this open house, and we look forward to seeing you in the upcoming events. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.